Let's look at auditing IT asset management. It is important that we test the software and systems we have to ensure that they are working reliably and meeting the requirements of the organization as well as compliance with regulations. The purpose of testing is to find flaws, to see if there are any problems within the software or within the system that could be exploited through an attack. We also want to validate that all of the functionality is working correctly. It is important that we test all of the elements of the software. Each individual piece must be tested to ensure that it is working correctly. When we look at software, we must test each individual line of code, as well as each of the arguments, to make sure that exceptions, errors, and all types of operations are handled correctly. Quite often, we can look at software testing from a top-down perspective, where we sort of look at what is the high-level objective and then go into each of the paths and routes that, of course, a transaction may take. This will ensure that the program is operating correctly. This is used quite often to find things like logic flaws, for example, within the program itself. But in other cases, we'll do bottom-up testing. And bottom-up testing is where we're actually going to test individual pieces to make sure each unit of code is working correctly, so that hopefully they will also work together properly once they are then integrated. The idea is to make sure that we do not have any modules that have a flaw buried in them. The problem with top-down testing is sometimes I won't notice, or it could be very difficult to find a problem within an individual module. This is all about protecting our IT assets. Now, what is an asset? An asset is something that's of worth to its owner. Now, obviously, some assets are tangible. A car, a building, cash. Other things are intangible. For example, reputation, your name, your brand, employee morale. And we have to understand what are the assets that are of value to our owners. When we work for an organization, what is that senior management and the other stakeholders within the company really place a value in? Obviously, we want to ensure that we are putting our attention into protecting those things that are important to the senior management and stakeholders of the organization. Now, some examples of typical assets, and we've heard for many years that people are our greatest asset, but people certainly are important. It's the people with the knowledge of how our business works, the knowledge of our customers, and so on, that are invaluable, that often we have to preserve. We have to preserve, should we say, not only safety, but even things like morale, so that these people themselves don't leave to work for somebody else. One of the most important assets of any organization today is its information. The information we have on our customers, products, intellectual property. All of this information, some of which is very sensitive or some which is of course very critical, is information that must be protected appropriately. We don't protect all information to the same level. No, that would be a waste of the precious few resources we have. Instead, we'll protect the information according to the level of protection it requires. Perhaps because of its importance to us as a company or because of regulation. We protect the infrastructure that all of our organizations today run on. Equipment and networks, for example, databases and software, utilities, all of these elements that are important for the business to run. They are the foundation for business operations, and certainly that infrastructure must be protected. We protect the money. Try to ensure that no one is going to be able to break into our systems and set up, say, for example, false wire transfers and help themselves to our cash. And of course, we protect our reputation. What is the reputation we have within the marketplace? And to many organizations, that has an incredible value as well, that they want to protect that reputation. One of the necessities in order to protect something is to know what we have. And this is where we should have things like configuration management databases and a place where we have an inventory of all of our assets. The idea of our asset inventory is that each asset is individually identified. So we know what assets we have, as well as what is the value of that asset, whether it's tangible or intangible or both in some cases. We also have to understand what's the importance of protecting that asset. For example, what would be the implications if that asset was to be lost or unavailable? And we make sure that we identify the assets that need to be recovered more promptly than others. Some assets are far more critical to business operations than others, and we need to identify that for part of our recovery planning. Where are these assets located? As well as, of course, we should for every asset indicate its security classification or its risk classification, usually based on things like sensitivity and criticality. Quite often we'll divide our assets into groups. We have some assets, for example, like hardware, software, office furniture, people, and we'll group the assets that belong together for the sake of management and administration. And for every asset, we should know who is the owner, who is really responsible for looking after that asset, as well as who are the users or the custodians of that asset as well.